Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amrit. I'm a digital health and healthcare analyst at CB Insights, where we cover everything in digital healthcare, and medtech. And with me, I have Vishal.
I'm Vishal Gulati. I'm managing partner of Recode Ventures. We are one of the few venture capital firms that is focused exclusively on AI, and probably the only firm that is focused exclusively on AI and healthcare.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking a lot about AI in general, AI agents, and what the medtech industry can learn from this industry. So maybe to start off, Vishal, how would you define the different versions or applications of AI, from generative to agents? Where does that all fall in?
Yeah, I think first of all, the topic of today's talk, it should specify that we're talking about AI agents and AI models. I don't want people who've flown in from around the world to LA and expect different types of models and agents. So I think that the way we track this, so we started from looking at what is AI doing to healthcare and how healthcare is evolving. But very soon we realized that that was the wrong question, because we also had to start looking at how AI was evolving, because the speed at which AI is evolving is so fast that whatever projections you may have on what version of AI you were using last year, where healthcare will go, and if you don't take into account where AI is moving to, you could find yourself in a very different place. So we then started to track AI much more closely to see what's going on. Just to give you an example, within a few weeks, if you go from ChatGPT to DeepSeek R1, the price difference for API calls is about 130 times. So if you can get API calls for $55 for 1 million calls on ChatGPT, but it's only sort of few cents. So what is really important for us to understand in whatever way we are using AI is that it's moving, and it's moving really fast. So what you did before last year with AI is probably not even relevant today. Now that's really problematic in healthcare, because you build products over a period of time. It can take you a couple of years to build a product. And then you also have to worry about regulation of what your product is going to be, what you're doing with it. So it's very, most people find it really challenging. So if you just look at the historical perspective of artificial intelligence, it's not new, right? It's actually very old. So the foundations of artificial intelligence, the theoretical foundations of artificial intelligence, were laid in the 50s. And the people, it was essentially the stuff that came out of the war. When we were trying to crack the Enigma code, it was impossible for humans to do it. So they said, okay, why don't we bring machines to try and solve that? And these are mechanical computers. Alan Turing and others were working on that. And then in around 1956, there was the famous Dartmouth conference, where people like Marvin Minsky and others, they were essentially the founders of the theoretical basis of AI. So the reason I bring that up is because every time I would talk about AI, there would be someone in the audience saying, oh, I was doing it in 1972 and nothing happened. And that's true, nothing did happen. So so there were these winters that happened. And then sort of in the 1980s, Jeff Hinton and others were quite instrumental in coming up with a new form, sort of using neural networks and backpropagation. And that was kind of the first thing, which is not, now it doesn't feel very unique, because backpropagation is just trying to tell the computer, when it gives you an answer, whether it is right or wrong, or how wrong it is. And then just like you teach a child to throw a basketball, you throw a basketball and say it's too high or too low, and then they learn. That's how computers learned. Right. And that was sort of quite impressive for its time. And it did give us some very, very valuable products. So if you go back and think about some of the early devices that were able to read ECGs, the US postcode, zip code readers, when you put a letter, handwriting recognition of your zip code and sending the letter to the right place, these were all products of neural networks using backpropagation. CAD, for example, the earliest sort of forms of radiology AI, if you think. And then there was this huge sort of what is called the winter. The long winter in AI is that people just thought that this will continue to get better, but it stopped. And that's kind of where everyone just said, well, AI doesn't work. So we've had this phases several times of AI doesn't work. And then when that happened, one of the problems was that there wasn't enough data when there weren't enough computers. And somehow no one was paying attention, and suddenly we had a lot of data and we had really fast computers. So some kids started to say, oh, hey, we have a lot of data, let's try and use it. So that created deep learning. And this is sort of 2006 sort of time horizon. And that I think that was a watershed moment where people started to realize that this will do something more. And that gave us amazing products. So the quality of products that we got out of that, there were similar applications like ECG, like images, CT scans, but those machines could read these much better. And that's when we started investing. So we started investing in AI around 2016, 2015. And that time we thought, oh my God, this is magic. And we thought we were so ahead of the curve. This is so cool. And that's sort of where a number of companies got started. From our experience, from our fund, we invested in companies that were doing mammograms, companies that were doing histopathology, companies that were doing drug discovery, all of those things. And then we thought, this is great. This is our great business. We're just going to find deep learning platforms that are going to do healthcare. And we're not paying attention to what comes after deep learning. And that was a mistake. So then the next generation is where we are now. So, deep learning cannot produce agents because deep learning can do only two things. It can do classification and it can do prediction. Those are the only two things that it can do. What that means is that the best thing you have is a point solution. So you can train a computer to decide, which is a famous ImageNet thing. You've showed lots of cats, lots of dogs. And then all you can do is put a picture in front of it saying, is this dog or is this cat? The computer can only answer dog or cat. Now, if you put a banana picture in front of the computer will probably call it a cat or a dog, depending on that banana is closer to a cat or closer to a dog.
Right.
So that is basically what the limitations of those things are, which means if you're going to get it to do mammograms, you can only show it mammograms. And not only that, there are limitations like all the images that you will use to train them will have to be of similar resolution, similar size, because you have to make that whole process very, very so structured in itself. Which also means that when you actually show it an image, when it's a product, which is different, it doesn't know what to do with it.
Right.
So but what we are now, the generation we are in, when we have these generative models, these models are much better. And these models have different properties. So the way I always try and describe it is, when you're a resident and somebody gives you an ECG, and when you are a professor having worked in cardiology for 30 years, and someone gives you an ECG, you look at them differently. When you're a resident, you look at where the waves are. Is this elevated? Is it not elevated? Or if you're a radiologist and someone gives you a chest X-ray, you have a checklist. Is the trachea in the middle? How's the lungs? How's the diaphragm? But when you are a senior professional, you don't do that. You look at it in one instance and your brain is able to absorb everything that's in the image, and you know that this person has this. And new forms of AI can do that. So they can assimilate a large amount of data, and that's called their context window. And these new models have very large context windows. And in those context windows, they can look at many, many parameters. And that is really exciting. One, because we could have more general purpose machines where you can look at whether this person has cancer or not cancer, is what we did before. Now you can say, what does this person have? That's different. Absolutely. And that's sort of where we are now. Mm-hmm. So maybe that was a very long introduction. I apologize.
Yeah, no, appreciate the history lesson from back in the 70s to now. So I think we've gotten a really comprehensive view. With every other company kind of having some AI element in their product, how do you at Recode Ventures evaluate what's truly meaningful and helpful in healthcare versus just something just on top?
Sure. So one thing that is really important, first of all, is that you always want to think of it as what problem they're solving. So it is really easy. You can get excited about technology, right? So I think that So you would not want to just get a company or investment company because they're using the latest model. The question is, what problem are they solving? Is it a meaningful problem? And I think as venture capitalists, one of the things we always care about is what problem they're solving. Is there a gap in the market but for that problem to be solved? And if there is, how big is that problem? Is it really worth us investing in that company? So you always look at it from that lens. So when you look at it from that lens, you start to imagine what new things might come out of new platforms. So then you start to say, okay, so these are the big problems that are not currently addressed by existing technologies, existing form of AI, because that's very, very limited. And then, so what might be next? And so that's how you start to think about it. So it's always about the problem. It's always about how addressable that problem is. And then you kind of also look at how easy it is to get to market. And then you look at the technology. You can't invest just technology for technology's sake.
Absolutely. So what are those areas of interest that you're noticing now? Where are those gaps existing that AI can plug in and solve?
So I think that if you look at the more newer models, the transformer-based models, which are agentic, a lot of the early applications have been in pharmaceuticals. And so if you think about the deep learning side of AI, that was very much friendlier to imaging, because imaging is actually a very good use case for deep learning. And that's why it fitted very much in hospital settings, very much in medical device industry. So there are about 900 FDA approvals now for radiology, and of which there is one company that has 200 of them. So this is kind of very, very much concentrated within the medical device industry. But when you look at the transformer models, most of the early traction has come from pharmaceuticals. And in fact, I think the medical device industry may be at the risk of being left behind. And if you look at partnerships that NVIDIA has done, they have done loads of partnerships with pharmaceutical companies. And when you and I spoke 3 days ago, we were saying that no medical device company has done any partnership with NVIDIA. And I said that to someone yesterday, and they corrected me. And so thanks for that. So there is now one partnership, which is, I hope, that start of many more partnerships to come. So I do believe that there is, so in general, what we have seen, so we invest both in companies. So we want these type of AI technologies to get to the patient, and we are agnostic about what path they choose. So whether they choose the path of going via medical device industry, or they choose the path of going through pharmaceutical industry. We have companies in our portfolio that are using light field technology to do image guidance, surgical guidance. But we also have companies that are developing new forms of new ways of getting DNA into the right cells for gene therapy. So we do both. So we've seen a lot more traction in the generative side in the pharmaceutical side, industry. And one of the reasons is that a lot of these generative technologies can actually generate designs and sequences, because remember, deep learning cannot generate anything. So deep learning can only answer a question, whether this is a cat or a dog, which is what it can do. So if you showed a deep learning platform 1,000 molecules and said which one was better, it might be able to tell you. But what you can't do to a deep learning model is say, design for me a molecule that will fit here. So you can't do that. But with generative, you can. So you can say, hang on, tell me what might be the best sequence for doing that. So that has received a lot of traction in the pharmaceutical industry, because if you're a company that has access to models and you can design new drug molecules, you can patent those drug molecules and you can create value for your company, and pharmaceutical industry is interested in those molecules. So that business model makes a lot of sense. But I think that the opportunity we are missing in medical device industry is medical device industry is still not looking at how to apply these models in their businesses. So it seems that device industry is waiting for people to come up with a product, and then they will see who else wants to buy it and where it fits in our existing franchises. So I think that is the mindset. I'm being provocative, so please correct me if I'm wrong and if you think that there is a different strategy.
Absolutely. So what do you think the medical device can learn from how pharma is operating with AI? How can they do this to either supercharge their products or build a new dimension of products for that industry?
I think that there has to be more openness to disruptive innovation. I think there has to be some understanding of that the future products may not look very much like the current products. This ability, and drug industry has been better at it. So, most of drug industry about 20 years ago was small molecules. Now, majority of drugs that are approved are antibodies or gene therapies and others. So there's been an acceptance by the pharmaceutical industry that the future will look very different from what the past was. So, the way the manufacturing plants you had that make small molecules will no longer, we just have to junk them and create new plants that make antibodies. And that was accepted by the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that there is a lot of installed base in inside medical devices, which is installed, which uses older technologies. And the tendency is to just pile more things into that rather than, and now there is some sense that I'm getting where from Philips and others is that they want to come to the next generation platforms. So Medtronic has gone through that process through their digital surgery acquisition and others. And I think that there is some sense that there will be new platforms. So that is really exciting. If we go into a new generation of platforms for medical devices, then there's opportunity for founders who are developing new products to be integrated into those.
Absolutely. I think we're seeing on the CV Insights end, a rapid explosion, especially in the clinical documentation, at least in the late of last year and then early this year with some of the biggest rages in a bridge. So that looks at more of the generative side of AI and more of a co-pilot that augments the physician's journey in speaking with their patients. As you see all these agents start to build up, especially when we look at the hospital and we look at the agents kind of taking over in the back end and maybe the co-pilots and the generative in the front end, how do you see that interaction playing out with medical devices such as endoscopy, surgery? Where do you see that overlay as these ecosystems start to grow?
So in theory, there are a lot of opportunities. So if you think about an operation, let's say spine surgery to correct kyphoscoliosis in a child. Now, one way to think about that procedure is that you have a surgeon, the surgeon looks at the patient, they do their imaging, CT scans, they cut them open, and then they correct the spine. That's kind of one way that you can think about it. But when an experienced surgeon is doing that surgery, there are a lot of things they're thinking about. They have to think about how tall the parents of this child are to try and imagine how tall this person will be, because some of the corrections they do will depend on how tall this person might be. Will this person grow up and play sport? And all of those things. So what really happens is that we are not fully accepting the fact that experienced physicians take into account a lot more data that a device maker thinks that they need. And that data is implicit and we just accept. And that's why good surgeons are very good surgeons and some surgeons are not very good, is because of that, of their ability to assimilate and synthesize all that information, try and project into the future and see what the needs of the patient might be. Now imagine if we could do this at scale and not be dependent on the small number of great physicians that we have who are able to do this. And that is sort of how I think about it, that this data, a lot of this data is available and a lot of these new platforms are really good. They have very large context windows to the extent that you could put everyone's cradle to grave data into the system, and that system could not only tell you what surgery to do, and I think the most challenging thing is that it might sometimes tell you to not do surgery, which is what device companies would not want to hear. But if they want to do surgery, what type of surgery to do, what type of implant to use, and to project into the future to see what kind of outcome this patient might have. So I think that all of those things are possible in the technology platforms. I think we just have to widen our horizon to see how much of this we can take inside. And the battle will be between the hospitals that have that data and the device companies that want to use that data. So there will be some kind of interaction in the future.
Absolutely. So we see this now with treatment selection in cancer and in oncology to help an oncologist decide if a patient would benefit from maybe adjuvant therapy or not. So you're kind of saying that this is going to extend towards the surgical platform where all this data can be...
Absolutely. I think there is no reason why it should not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds great. It sounds like an incredible future, and I think AI has this potential within these gray areas to solve that and just provide as much data for the physician to make the right decision.
Yeah, I think, but there's just a word of caution that the way AI is perceived in the media and what we hear about it doesn't mean it's easy. It may look easy that, oh my God, all these amazing things are happening. Most of things that those are happening, there's a very low bar because most people are currently using it to cheat on their essays, right? So that's kind of how it is being used, and the bar there is relatively low. But when you start to build products and programs and then try and apply into systems that have hundreds of individuals involved, there's incentives, there's cost, all of those things. So it's not going to be easy, but what I'm here to say is that AI is not some magic dust that you sprinkle and you get amazing products. If that was the case, I would be out of business. But what I'm saying is that there is an exciting future of AI. And I think that it is all incumbent upon all of us to be part of it and to try and build great products which will help patients.
Absolutely. So you bring up a great question about the data. So every time, for example, the generative AI, you're creating a very valuable data source between the patient and the provider. What are some of those red flags we should be aware of so that we're not jumping into a problem with the data getting leaked, the data getting used for training it towards payers and providers? What are some of those cautions that you would put as we start towards this AI future?
So I don't think that so there are a couple of differences between how we access data for deep learning versus how we are accessing it for the generative type of AI, because all those ethical standards, all those governance standards are there. There are laws, there are regulations, they're different in different parts of the world, but those regulations have to be adhered to. I think that the phase of deep learning has done something really important, is that's taught us all stakeholders how to manage high quality data. It's hard to do, but it's something that now people know how to do. I think the difference is that what still needs to be thought through is who owns the product, because these machines are able to build new things. So these are not just reading Shakespeare, they're writing Shakespeare. So what happens if a generative AI reads all of Shakespeare's work and then writes another version which is different, and what that means? And I don't think we have confronted those issues yet, but I'm confident that we'll be able to deal with them.
Great. Well, we have about 15 minutes. Are there any questions or directions that we could yeah.
Thank you very much. So when we talk about AI agents, so I'm reflecting on the other side of monetization within medtech. How do you see, let's say, let me give an example. A particular startup is working on building an AI agent for one specific use case. How do you see the trajectory, the growth of the company towards the point of an exit? Who are going to be the potential acquisition partners? Are these going to be the companies who are owning products without AI, or is it how are these AI agents going to be valued at some point? How is the future going to look like for such a product that's being built like an AI agent? When you talk about
Sure. So I think that we haven't seen a lot of AI agents being implemented yet. And the few that I have seen, I've seen in two categories. One category is where these agents are analyzing patients' data and updating what the possible scenarios for this patient might be at in the future. And as new data gets added to their EHR, they're able to do that. Another company which is in our portfolio has an agentic system which is able to talk to a parent of a child with rare diseases and is able to guide them through a question and answer session. And they believe that within 20 questions, they're able to diagnose rare diseases, which currently take several years for a physician to diagnose. And the reason why these agents can do that better than physicians is because these rare diseases physicians see very rarely, as as would be the case. And so they don't have the expertise in being able to ask the right questions to get to the right answer. But using these large language models, they are able to build that. So for those companies, again, the exit for those companies will be who benefits from that. So if that information, currently their customers are companies that have rare disease products. So they're able to help patients get diagnosed, because without diagnosis, there is no treatment. So to imagine a future for them would be to see whether which companies benefit from giving these companies access to patients. So that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. One of the areas in medtech that's had a lot of innovation with AI is the whole diagnostics fields and tech bias,
Yes.
and using a lot of data, mostly on deep tech, but predictive models. However, the real world challenges have been regulatory and FDA clearance, and then also reimbursement and payers, just in terms of, even though the information is valuable, being able to iterate, get algorithms that are updated. What have you seen? One, do you agree? But two, what's the path forward?
So let's start with the regulatory. Thank you for the question. So just start with the regulatory landscape. So the regulatory landscape for imaging and deep learning type algorithms is very well trodden. FDA has been very, very upfront about it. They've been on the front foot to get this done, and they have done a fantastic job. In most cases, if you do it correctly, you are able to modify your algorithm without having to get a new approval. You just do a letter to file, and most of our companies do that regularly. On reimbursement, I think that I think it's been pretty good. If you look at retinal imaging companies that are diagnosing diabetic retinopathy, for example, most of them have reimbursement. One of our portfolio company, Caption Health, which is in the space of taking ultrasound images of the heart, they were able to get reimbursement. So there is a path for those things. But the challenge has been that a lot of these have been point solutions, and some of them do not solve a big enough problem for there to be a full reimbursement pathway for them. And I think that limits what places where we can go. So any system, any process which is a long process where you are trying to build a product which takes a tiny piece of that, those are always hard. Which is why you find that a lot of the imaging products have been in cancer screening, because in cancer screening, imaging is the 90% of the pathway, because you look at the image. But if you're doing imaging for a preoperative process, that's a very small part of the whole pathway. So I look for companies where they are capturing the large part of a pathway, and that's how we think we can get.
I was thinking more proteomics and genomics. I agree
Right.
with you on imaging, and those have been the ones.
Yes,
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
Great panel, and I'm glad to see the progress happening. To complement, I'm a cardiologist from Canada, and we've been deploying our own models in AI. And commenting on the panomics side, we are the only company globally to pick up a whole genome sequencing analysis and clinical report from VCFR in 5 minutes.
Yes.
You can have 1,000 sample, you can have 1,000,000 sample.
Yes.
The time is a constant. How you update the models, how to make the changes is very important. What matters, the data getting in the real time to people's hand. Me as a cardiologist, report in front of me is more important from a genomically when it's in front of me. Yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, after coming back after 1 month, it's useless.
Yes.
And we are deploying AI agents also developing. We are developing a longevity-based virtual hospital. We have a clinic in Dubai. We'll just launch recently. And just planning to launch this virtual clinic hospital soon. And AI agents where we are looking to develop and deploy it, which the trainings are going on, in the front-end side. So
Yeah.
the receptionist work, the day-to-day interaction with the patients, low-risk environment.
Yes.
And I do see a growth happening in the Middle Eastern region. The demand is there. So do you see the similar way that demand is going to be happening here?
So I think that there is a lot of processes within hospitals, within healthcare systems that are unregulated processes currently done by humans, and a lot of these will get automated. The one area, and those will not find great sexy headlines, and many of those companies will not give venture type returns, but they will have a huge impact on day-to-day lives of physicians and patients. So one example, which is currently sort of in the gray zone of regulation, which is digital scribes. These note-taking applications, which are taking notes of consultations between physicians and patients, are completely unregulated. And so there are challenges with that, because there is a lot of evidence which shows that the accuracy levels are not very high.
But we have implemented that.
Yes.
We use something called BioELR. We end up in the winning circle in HIMSS a couple of weeks ago in Las Vegas.
Yes.
So now Kaiser Permanente wants to be a pilot with the technology.
Yes.
So essentially, it's a next generation health record system. We call it ELR, electronic longitudinal record system, with the variable data, environmental data we take in, ingest, and then AI monitors every real time. So at the same time, the biggest challenge I faced my patients was that become a transcriber. Note writing, dictation writing. So what we did in the modeling was, when I talk to my patients, it listens. Then it writes the notes on my behalf.
Yes.
And then I review it in the end. And they will command, okay, send it to fax to this doctor, to that patient, this and that.
See, fax. These are using the cutting edge AI.
Yes.
But then it has to go via fax.
Exactly. So that's the only system. That's the only drawback the system is. You see, if you have an AI, but the problem is to the fax.
Yes. Yeah, that's a valid point. I think that what's really interesting in that sort of thing is that because these models have become so easily available, and we're living through the golden age of models. These models cost billions of dollars to make, and you can rent them for virtually nothing. So I think that model is not the product. So transcription is not the product. The product is someone verifying that transcription to say it is accurate. That is the product. So I'm not going to back a company that can transcribe, because that's a race to the bottom. But I want to back a company that is going to guarantee the accuracy of this and have it regulated. So where the product is has also shifted with the new models.
It is true. And from genomic side, I want to give this last comment. What we felt was, we have built the fastest genomic platform. It's like the fastest jet we have built, but the airports are not there.
That's right. Yeah.
So the systems are not there to use the technology we have built. That's what we're finding globally.
That is true.
So I'm looking forward to seeing the work your companies are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the panel today. So at the beginning of your talk, when you answered the first question, you talked about how medical device is a bit of a laggard in this space.
It's a very high risk for me to say it at this point.
I actually agree with you.
Right? Yeah.
I'm coming forward to agree with you, because we're in complete alignment. From my experience, and I just would love your insight on this, because I think, I'm from a very large medical device organization, and I can tell you we are a laggard in this space because the entire organization is not at the competency level that we need to be at to be able to converse in the language of AI. And if I think about your intro and how you even set the stage, right, on how did we even get here? I haven't heard anyone explain it in such a kind of methodical way. And so I think for us to not be laggards, we have a really big task in front of us, which is to lift some of the larger organizations, not from an R&D side, let's put that group aside, but it really is from the executive side, the commercial side, the sales side, the people who have to carry the message of the product. And so any recommendations or your insights on how do we start to lift the medtech organizations from a competency standpoint in AI, and any resources that you're like, these are golden resources?
Yeah. Well, I'm slightly conflicted in answering your question. In fact, it works very well for my business that med device industries are not.
Sure. That's good points.
So I think that so this is actually in my interest. That is. But I will still answer your question. So I think that in general, what I would recommend is to, and this is something which when software innovation was also starting to disrupt healthcare, I used to say that people should experience software and try and understand, be able to imagine. I don't expect everyone within a medical device company to be able to use models and build these applications on their own, although it's not that hard. But I do want them to be aware to the level that they can imagine a future with it. And I think that that level of competence is absolutely essential within at least a part of your organization where they can try and imagine what is possible. And I think the way VCs do that is that we don't always just wait for founders to come and say, this is a great idea. Oftentimes, we are expecting them to come with an idea. So, you have a list of things that will happen, and now you're waiting for the right person to do those things. So I think that kind of thinking is absolutely essential, and I think that every organization should encourage people to do that.
Well, I don't think you have to worry. Even if we encouraged everyone to do it, we are not going to be disrupting anytime soon. So you're very safe.
No, to add to Vishal's comment just briefly, we evaluate AI readiness within companies. So we do study how some of these big companies are positioned for an AI-ready future. And pharma, the big hire has been chief AI officer and really buffing out their AI teams within those pharma companies. So we track the partnerships as well. So they have been partnering with startups from small to big, and with NVIDIA as well, laying the groundwork for maybe future applications of AI. I think speaking to Vishal's point, just having people who are conversed or well-versed in the AI knowledge is just as important to laying the groundwork for the future.
Hey, thank you for the talk. I did have a question around the burden of proof in healthcare. We know that, AI skepticism may be high, especially among clinicians. So my question for you is, what are some of the emerging best practice ways of building AI that's verifiable and explainable? Last year, it seemed like RAG was really popular. This year, maybe not so much. So I'm just kind of curious your perspective if there are sort of emerging areas around that.
Thank you. I think that there has been the two areas where there has been a lot of work done in the last decade in AI, and especially in healthcare, is generalizability and explainability. Because without those two things, it's impossible to have a medical product. And so I think that it is. So many of our companies spent a lot of resource to build more generalizable AI, so that they were able to. So one of the ways you do that is you essentially have a wider range of data that you expose your training to, and so on. And explainability is another thing, but it has not been a huge issue, because if the model is very highly predictable, then explainability becomes less important. If it is less predictable, and that's what's going to happen when we come to multimodal models, and we are giving it all different types of data, and then you can expect a very wide range of answers. And in that situation, explainability will become more important. So I think, again, as I said, the product is not the AI model. The product is all of these things: predictability, explainability. That is the product.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, John. My name is Ali. I'm the CEO of CloudCath. We started off with building a medical device that sits in home dialysis patients, in the home of peritoneal dialysis patients, and we pick up on infection origination 3 days earlier than the standard of care. That's fortunately been going great, and I go to market, closing the year at about 5 million ARR. Now we're going upstream. We're targeting the chronic kidney disease population with a patient management platform to incentivize more of them to start at the home. And this is basically a 6-month period through which we need to increase their activation, provide specific education, and it's a very tailored experience per patient depending on where they're starting. We need to sort of meet them there. We're in the very early stages. Do you have any examples of either companies or projects that have successfully delivered behavioral change at scale across a wide population like this one?
I think behavioral change is hard. That's the first thing you want to start with. So there was a lot of excitement around behavioral change in obesity. There was a lot of excitement, behavioral change in mental health, which through CBT and other types of platforms. Some of them have scaled, others haven't. I think in case of obesity, I think GLP-1s disrupted most of those. So that's not happening. And I think in mental health, some of the CBD platforms have been very good at that. So that's all I can tell you.
Awesome. Well, in our case, it's a 4-month period that we're trying to reach a single binary output of.
Yeah.
Do it at the home versus crash and start in center. So if you get any thoughts, please let me know. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think that's time for us. So thank you so much for an engaging discussion. And yeah, thank you. If you have any questions, we'll be here. Thanks.